Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Nikhil Sanade and this is the chapter 3 part 2 of the Rich Dad Poor Dad series. Let's continue. The rule number 1. You must know the difference between an asset and a liability and buy assets. If you want to be rich, this is all you need to know. It is rule number 1. It is the only rule. This may sound absurdly simple, but most people have no idea how profound this rule is. Most people struggle financially because they do not know the difference between an asset and a liability. Rich people acquire assets, the poor and middle class acquire liabilities, but they think they are assets. When Rich Dad explained this to Mike and me, we thought he was kidding. Here we were nearly teenagers and waiting for the secret to getting rich, and this was his answer. It was so simple that we had to stop for a long time to think about it. "What is an asset?" asked Mike. "Don't worry right now," said Richard. "Just let the idea sink in. If you can comprehend the simplicity, your life will have a plan and be financially easy. It is simple. That is why the idea is missed." "You mean all we need to know is what is an asset, acquire them, and we will be rich?" I asked. Rich Dad nodded his head. "It's that simple." If it's that simple, how come everyone is not rich?" I asked. Rich Dad smiled. "Because people don't know the difference between an asset and a liability." I remember asking, how could adults be so silly? If it is that simple, if it is that important, why would everyone not want to find out? It took our rich dad only a few minutes to explain what assets and liabilities were. As adult, I have difficulty explaining it to other adults. Why? Because adults are smarter. In most cases, the simplicity of the idea escapes most adults because they have been educated differently. They have been educated by other educated professionals such as bankers, accountants, real estate agents, financial planners, and so forth. The difficulty comes in asking adults to unlearn or become children again. An intelligent adult often feels it is demeaning to pay attention to simplistic definitions. Rich Dad believed in the KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid. So he kept it simple for two young boys, and that made the financial foundation strong. So, what causes the confusion? Or how could something so simple be so screwed up? Why would someone buy an asset that was really a liability? The answer is found in basic education. We focus on the word literacy and not financial literacy. What defines something to be an asset or something to be a liability are not words. In fact, if you really want to be confused, look up the words asset and liability in the dictionary. I know the definition may sound good to a trained accountant, but for the average person, it makes no sense. But we adults are often too proud to admit that something does not make sense. As young boys, Rich Dad said, what defines an asset is not words but numbers. If you cannot read the numbers, you cannot tell an asset from a hole in the ground. In accounting, Rich Dad would say it's not the numbers but what the numbers are telling you. It's just the words, it's not just the words but the story the words are telling you. Many people read but do not understand much. It's called reading comprehension, and we all have different abilities when it comes to reading comprehension. For example, I recently bought a new VCR. It came with an instruction book that explained how to program the VCR. All I wanted to do was record my favorite TV show on Friday night. I nearly went crazy trying to read the manual. Nothing in the world is more complex than learning how to program my VCR. I could read the words, but I understood nothing. I get an A for recognizing the words, I get an F for comprehension. So it is with financial statements for most people. If you want to be rich, you have got to read and understand numbers. If I heard that once, I heard it 1,000 times from my rich dad. And I also heard The rich acquire assets and the poor and middle class acquire liabilities. Here is how to tell the difference between an asset and a liability. Most accountants and financial professionals do not agree with the definitions, but these simple drawings were the start of the strong financial foundation for the two young boys. To teach preteen boys, Rich Dad kept everything simple, using as many pictures as possible, as few words as possible, and no numbers for years. The above box is an income statement, often called a profit and loss statement. It measures income and expense, money in and money out. The bottom diagram in a balance sheet, it is called that because it is supposed to balance assets and against liabilities. Many financial novices do not do know the relationship between the income statement and the balance sheet. That relationship is vital to understand. The primary cause of financial struggle is simply not knowing the difference between an asset and a liability. The cause of the confusion is found in the definition of two words. If you want a lesson in confusion, simply look up the words asset and liability in the dictionary. How it makes makes sense to train accountants, but to the average person it may as well be written in Mandarin. You need the words in the definition, but true comprehension is difficult. So, as I said earlier, my rich dad simply told two young boys that asset, put money in your pocket, nice, simple, and usable. Now, the assets and liabilities have been defined through pictures. It may be easier to understand my definitions in words. An asset is something that puts money in my pocket, and a liability is something that takes money out of my pocket. This is really all you need to know. If you want to be rich, simply speed your life buying assets. If you want to be poor or middle class, spend your life buying liabilities. If it's not knowing the difference that causes most of the financial struggle in the real world. Literacy, both in words and numbers, is the foundation of financial struggle. If people are having difficulties financially, there is something that cannot read, either in numbers or words. Something is misunderstood. The rich dad, the rich are rich because they are more literate in different areas than people who struggle financially. So, if you want to be rich and maintain your wealth, it's important to be financially literate in words as well as numbers. The arrows in the diagrams represent the flow of cash or cash flow. Numbers alone really mean little, just as words alone mean little. It's the story that counts. In financial reporting, reading numbers is looking for the plot, the story of where the cash is flowing. In 80% of the most families, the financial story is a story of working hard in an effort to get ahead. Not because they don't take money, but because they spend their lives buying liabilities instead of assets. For instance, this is the cash flow pattern of a poor person or a young person still at home. All these diagrams were obviously oversimplified. Everyone has living expenses and need for food, shelter, and clothing. The diagram show the following cash through a poor, middle class, or a wealthy person's life. It is difficult. It is the cash flow that tells us the story. It is the story of how a person handles their money, what they do after they get the money in their hand. The reason I started with the story of richest man in America is to illustrate the flaw in the thinking of so many people. The flaw is the money will solve all problems. That is why I cringe whenever I hear people ask me how to get rich quicker or do they start. I often hear I'm in debt so I need to make more money. But more money will often not solve the problems. In fact, it may actually accelerate the problem. Money often makes obvious or tragic human flaws. Money often puts a spotlight on what we do not know. That is why all too often a person who comes into a sudden windfall or of cash, let's say an inheritance, a pay raise or lottery winning, soon returns to the same financial mess. if not worse, than the mess they were in before they received the money. Money not only acquaintance the cash flow pattern running in your head. If your pattern is to spend everything you get, most likely an increase in cash will just result in an increase in spending. Thus the saying a fool and his money is one big party. Okay, I will this part chapter chapter 3 part 2 here, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for listening to my audiobook.